Hello, and welcome to Day by Day True Crime Stories, the podcast where we explore a different crime or justice milestone from this day in history. I'm your host, Kona Gallagher, and today is February 18th. On this day in 2001, Robert Hanssen, a veteran FBI agent, was arrested for spying for the Soviet Union and later Russia. Over 22 years, he sold some of America's most closely guarded secrets, putting national security at risk and causing irreparable damage to U.S. intelligence. His story isn't just about espionage, though. It's about greed, deception, and a double life that unraveled in spectacular fashion. Today, we'll break down who Hanssen was, how he got away with his betrayal for decades, and the intricate FBI operation that finally took him down. Let's get started. Robert Philip Hanssen seemed like the perfect government agent. He was brilliant, disciplined, and deeply religious, the kind of man you'd least expect to betray his country. Hanssen was born on April 18, 1944 in Chicago, Illinois. Raised in a strict Catholic household, he developed a keen interest in intelligence and law enforcement early in life. He earned a bachelor's degree in chemistry from Knox College before briefly attending dental school. Later, he pursued a business degree, earning an MBA in accounting and information systems from Northwestern University. Hanssen joined the Chicago Police Department in 1972, working in internal affairs, investigating corruption within the force, which is pretty wild for a guy who later became one of the most infamous spies in U.S. history, but I digress. In 1976, he joined the FBI, where he specialized in counterintelligence, gaining access to top-secret government operations. Throughout his tenure, Hanssen held various positions in New York, Washington, D.C., and other field offices, gaining access to top-secret information along the way. By all appearances, he was an upstanding agent, but beneath the surface, Robert Hanssen was leading a double life, one that would ultimately make him one of the most infamous traitors in American history. By 1979, he had already begun selling some of the FBI's most sensitive secrets to the Soviet Union. Unlike other spies, who were often recruited by foreign agencies, Hanssen took the initiative himself. In 1979, he walked into a Soviet trade office in Washington, D.C., and offered to sell classified information. To put it simply, he just did it for the love of the game. This wasn't about ideology for him. Hanssen wasn't a Soviet sympathizer. He was driven purely by greed, though he later claimed that he was also testing the limits of U.S. counterintelligence. At first, he played it safe. He leaked information about U.S. surveillance efforts on Soviet intelligence officers, pocketing a few $1,000s here and there. But once he realized how easy it was to get away with it, he escalated. Over the years, Hanssen's leaks became more and more brazen. He exposed U.S. surveillance efforts on Soviet embassies, shared details about double agents, and most notably, provided the Soviets with names of 3 high-level informants working for U.S. intelligence. One of those informants, Dmitry Polyakov, a high-ranking Soviet general, was executed in 1988 after being exposed by Hanssen. In 1981, Hanssen went dark for a few years after his wife caught him handling cash suspiciously and confronted him. He swore he had only given the Soviets worthless information and even confessed to his priest. But the guilt didn't last. In 1985, he re-established contact, this time directly with the KGB under the alias Ramon Garcia. Over the next decade and a half, Hanssen supplied thousands of classified documents, betraying the very agency he was sworn to protect. Some of what he gave away included details about a secret FBI tunnel built under the Soviet embassy in Washington meant for eavesdropping, and sensitive nuclear war strategy and U.S. counterintelligence methods. In exchange, he was paid over $1.4 million, mostly in cash and diamonds. But Hanssen was paranoid. He never met his Soviet handlers in person. Instead, he used dead drops, which means that he would leave documents and receive payments in secret locations, often inside wooded parks or underneath bridges. His secrecy worked, and for 2 decades, he went undetected. But by the early 1990s, the FBI knew something was wrong. Critical U.S. intelligence operations were being compromised, and it was clear that there was a mole in either the FBI or the CIA. In 1994, the U.S. arrested Aldrich James, a CIA officer who had also been spying for the Soviets. Authorities initially thought that he was the sole traitor, but after Ames's arrest, the leaks continued. That meant that someone else was still out there. A special task force, codenamed Greysuit, was formed to hunt down the second mole. For years, they suspected the wrong man, CIA officer Brian Kelly. He was investigated, interrogated, and even temporarily removed from duty, but he was completely innocent. The real break came in 2000 when the FBI paid a Russian intelligence officer $7 million to hand over classified Soviet-era documents. Among them was an audio tape of the mole speaking to his handler, as well as a plastic trash bag that had been used for dead drops. After analyzing fingerprints and voice recordings, they finally had their guy, Robert Hanssen. Now that they knew Hanssen was the mole, the FBI had to be careful. Hanssen had spent his entire career in counterintelligence. He would see through a sloppy operation immediately. In December 2000, he was promoted to a new role at FBI headquarters, a position designed to limit his access to sensitive data while allowing investigators to monitor him closely. The FBI also assigned Eric O'Neill, a young counterintelligence officer, to work as Hanssen's assistant. O'Neill's real job? To spy on the spy. One of the most critical discoveries was Hanssen's Palm 3 PDA. Now, for those of you who are too young to remember Palm Pilots, they were basically smartphones before we had smartphones. It was more of a primitive mini computer. In a high-risk maneuver, O'Neill managed to briefly obtain the device, allowing FBI technicians to download and analyze its contents. The data provided indisputable proof of Hanssen's betrayal, encrypted files detailing his dead drop locations and communications with the Russians. Armed with solid evidence, the FBI moved in. On February 18, 2001, Hanssen made his final dead drop at Foxstone Park in Virginia. After placing classified documents under a wooden bridge, he walked away, unaware that his decades-long espionage career was about to come to an end. As he walked away from the drop sites, FBI agents swarmed him. His first words? "What took you so long?" Hanssen quickly realized the depth of evidence against him, and on July 6, 2001, he pleaded guilty to 15 counts of espionage and 1 count of conspiracy to commit espionage. This guilty plea allowed him to avoid the death penalty. He was sentenced to 15 consecutive life terms in ADX Florence, the Supermax prison in Colorado, the same prison that houses terrorists and drug lords. For 23 hours a day, Hanssen was held in solitary confinement, a fitting punishment for someone who had spent decades betraying his country in secret. He died there in June 2023 at the age of 79, never knowing true freedom again. Hanssen's espionage activities had devastating consequences for U.S. national security. His leaks led to the execution of at least 2 Soviet double agents and compromised numerous intelligence operations. He also revealed highly classified information about U.S. nuclear strategy, counterintelligence efforts, and ongoing investigations into Russian espionage. His betrayal prompted a comprehensive overhaul of the FBI's internal security protocols. The agency implemented stricter access controls, more rigorous employee monitoring, and mandatory polygraph testing for those in sensitive positions. Additionally, Hanssen's case exposed significant weaknesses in interagency communication between the FBI and CIA, prompting intelligence reforms aimed at preventing similar breaches in the future. So what drove Hanssen to betray his country? Unlike spies who defect for ideological reasons, Hanssen was largely motivated by greed and ego. He lived a relatively modest lifestyle despite his illicit earnings, often hiding cash and valuables instead of spending them lavishly. Some speculate that he viewed his espionage as a game, a challenge to outwit his own agency. Hanssen was also deeply religious. He was a practicing Catholic who attended church regularly. And this contradiction, betraying his nation while presenting himself as a devout family man, has puzzled analysts for years. In the end, Hanssen's double life collapsed, leaving behind a legacy of betrayal and one of the most damaging espionage cases in U.S. history. So, a fun fact about me is about 15 years ago, I actually worked with a lot of Robert Hanssen's family members, including some of his kids and in-laws. And I've actually been over to dinner at the house with his wife. So after he went to prison, she remained in their same Virginia home, and it was a modest home. I mean, it's worth a lot of money now just because of the area, but they were not a family who lived super lavishly. And even though part of Robert Hanssen's betrayal and double life included mistresses that he did spend some of that money on, his wife remained faithful to him and visited him at the Supermax prison in Colorado, as far as I know, up to his death. Just another weird thing about living in Northern Virginia. Thank you for joining me on today's episode of Day by Day True Crime Stories. If you found this story compelling, please subscribe, rate, and review us on your favorite podcast platform. And be sure to join me again tomorrow as we explore another significant event in true crime history. Until then, stay safe, and remember, behind every headline is a life worth remembering. Day by Day True Crime Stories is a Little Monster production.
Hey, you can do it!